We start this second hour with an interview with a very important gentleman who is in fact the Chief Executive Officer of Market Research Services Limited. And we're talking about Mr. Don Anderson, whose recent polls have revealed an overwhelming number of Jamaicans believe that both the government and opposition are underperforming in their respective capacities. Don Anderson's poll revealed that the Holness administration has seen a 14.3 percentage point increase in the number of Jamaicans viewing its performance negatively, which could be either poor or very poor, moving from 30% in July 2022 to 44.3% 7 months later. Now, the figure is 7.4 percentage point difference from the Mark Golding-led opposition, with 51.7% of the 1,002 eligible voters polled indicating that the opposition is performing poorly. Let's at this point just welcome Mr. Don Anderson. Morning, Don. Welcome. How you doing?
Greetings. Morning, Richie B. I'm great, man. Good to hear you.
Same here, my brother. And I see you went out into the market and you have some polls that, as usual, everybody's talking about.
Right. One way or another.
That is not an unfamiliar position that you found yourself in.
Not at all. It's been a long time.
I know. And your track record speaks for itself. Now, Don, are we at a junction in our nation's history when the majority of the Jamaicans feel uncomfortable somewhat? Maybe that's a strong term, both with the government and the opposition at the same time. And is this something that we've seen in the past in our history?
I wouldn't say it's a rarity, but it certainly hasn't happened much. And it feeds into the notion that persons are becoming more and more disenchanted with the political parties and with politicians. We can see that from the decline in number of persons who are prepared to participate in the voting process. So you may want to ascribe some of that in 2020 to COVID. Mm-hmm. But in that year, that election year, only 37% of the people who were eligible to vote did so. And this is coming from a situation, let's go back to 1962, where the voting turnout was in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at something, a fall off of more than 40-odd percentage points over the period. It says that there's something not happening. People aren't being encouraged to go to vote. And we do have some reasons why. So, yes, it is an unusual situation where both political parties are now falling in terms of how people perceive them performing.
If this trajectory continues, then it means that we could even expect a lower turnout in the next general election. Well, what are some of the reasons and what are some of the things that you think need to be done by these political parties?
Well, you need to look, first of all, at the reasons and to see how they can be addressed. As a matter of fact, I let you know that I was invited by the electoral office maybe 2 weeks ago to speak to this very issue of low voter turnout. And we were able to produce for them reasons based on data that we have collected as to why people aren't being engaged. A lot of it has to do with how they see the politicians, how they see politics in general. And the fact of the matter is that young persons are not being engaged. So each succeeding year, you have a greater number of people who are detached from the political process. We did a survey of 15 to 17-year-olds a few years ago, and they have no interest in politics generally, you know? So it's all about how the politicians are perceived, how politics is perceived. People say politics is dirty. They say politicians don't keep promises. They say they're not benefiting from any of them. And these are the things that feed into a decline in degree of interest in voting, which is not good. And if this should continue, then, you know, we really have a huge problem of the challenge to democracy. So what needs to be done? I think it really revolves around the parties looking at themselves, doing some introspection, and finding ways to convince more persons that it is actually worthy and important that they go to vote. That's a huge challenge.
I agree. Greetings, Mr. Anderson. Shells here.
Hey, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man. Now, you mentioned what the parties have to do, but do they have enough time, though, Mr. Anderson?
Well, they determine when the elections are held. Right? So, let's say that another national election isn't due until 2025. So, 2 years plus, we're probably midterm right now. So I think if they are committed to really look at the situation carefully, but some people believe that this particular pattern is something that they're not unhappy with. I can't say that this is so, but there's a feeling that, there isn't the will to change this. And some people perhaps believe that the horse has gone through the gate. That's going to be very difficult to change people's perception in today's environment where, corruption is such a huge issue in our society.
The most recent poll that I heard is one where I think you indicated from the results that the PNP would have 28% of voters who would be inclined to vote for them, 28 point something, and the JLP 27 point something, which would mean that the PNP would be ahead somewhat in that regard. Can you help us understand that, and then look at some of the other findings that you have published before that?
All right. Well, let me give you the exact numbers because they're pretty clear. The question is asked, of the 44% who said they would go to vote if an election was held at the same.
Yes.
So the question is, do you intend to go to vote? And 44% of the 100% that we interviewed said they would go to vote. So we then filtered down from that 44% and we said, okay, you're going to go to vote. Who are you likely to vote for? Even here, we have a situation where people are not committing themselves to who they're going to vote for. They don't want to say so yet. Some people have made up their minds, and some people are saying, well, I'm still not so sure. I don't want to vote. So 28.1% of that 44% said they would vote for the People's National Party, and 27.9%. So there's really no difference between the two sets of numbers. It's a 0.2%, which is negligible, which is razor thin, which is really nothing, given the margin of error, which is plus or minus 3%, which means that in actual, the data could vary by 3% either way.
But can it be interpreted that the PNP is sort of closing the gap then based on where it was prior in your last survey?
Oh, that is irrefutable, because in the last survey that we did for the Arja Gleaner Group in July of 2022, there was a 13 percentage point gap between the JLP at 31% and the People's National Party at 18%, and that represented an increase over the previous survey, which was done in 2021. So yes, there has been a 13% change in favor of the People's National Party since July 2022. So there has been a narrowing of the gap,
But would you consider that a major swing?
Yeah, that is definitely a major swing. A major swing. I mean, that alone turns elections on the head,
The postponement of the local government election, what has been happening on the industrial relations front, are these factors that might have caused the people to indicate those results?
Well, I'm going to speak, as I always speak, empirically. There wasn't a question which addressed that particular issue. But yes, what we're picking up in the marketplace is that these are all factors, not one of them by themselves, but combined. You had the whole question of the uncertainty about the local government election and probably the way in which it was being conditioned. That, we're going to postpone it kind of stuff. And there's a feeling of arrogance in terms of how that was communicated to the nation, and the fact that despite encouragement from a number of private sector bodies, that they said, that we're going to go ahead and postpone it anyway, which was a disappointment to a lot of people. The whole environment of wage disputes and uncertainty about new negotiations with the public sector workers, the police, the nurses, the doctors, etc. These are factors. The whole question of the financial situation of the SSL came out. People are saying, boy, this probably wasn't handled very well by the entity, which is government's entity, which was supposed to have been monitoring the situation. A number of factors played in at the same time to have kind of pulled down the performance rating of the government, and these are things that are very important and huge factors in people's minds leading into our consideration of election voting.
Yes.
Understood. Now, Mr. Anderson, as it relates to the competence of the leaders, is it a case where, it's almost like, we're settling for the people are settling for the worst of the worst, if that makes sense. You know, the lesser evil, if that's the best way to put it, because a lot of persons aren't still quite comfortable with the leadership coming from the opposition. So is it a case where, you know, the public, they're just so fed up, they just want to see the current administration out?
There's a theory that in Jamaica we don't vote in but we vote out, you know, and that has been borne out in a number of elections. Now, what we find was that the Jamaica Labour Party has been very leader-centric over the last 5 years or so. In other words, their rating has been dictated to a large extent by the rating of the leader. All right? Now, we need to note that the leader of the government, Andrew Holness, his rating fell by 13 percentage points, which is just coincidental, from 38 to 25, which is a huge drop. But then we know in the marketplace that the leader is the more vulnerable of the two. So whilst Golden's rating also fell, he had far less to lose, you know. So I think what we're finding is that there is a certain kind of disaffection with the leadership at the moment of both political parties. And the fact that Holness is the one in the prime driving seat is why his percentages would have fallen to the extent that it did. But what it meant was that he dragged the performance of the government down as a result of the closeness of the performance of the government with his own performance. So are people settling for... It's difficult to say, but I think the fact that we're so leader-centric, when the leader's performance falls, then we expect that, you know, people are going to be turned off to the process a bit more. And I think that's what we're seeing.
The PNP will no doubt have reason to celebrate these findings. The JLP, should they be overly concerned? And the fact that they have their hands on the purse strings, would that not make a difference? Should they go right into elections where they will have more spending power, and could they swing the tide back to what it was before?
All right, two quick issues. They've dealt with two quick issues there.
Yes.
Sure. It's not very often you see the PNP released in a poll, so there has to be a reasoning. All right. And we're not generally, disposed to doing a survey for a particular party which they release, because invariably, you know, people are saying, boy, if it looks good, it's because they pay you to do it. All right. Now, I think my reputation is above that, so probably won't touch on that one. But obviously, they felt important to release these because the findings, in a way, even though exposes quite a bit of negatives as far as the PNP is concerned, in the final analysis says that they look like they're making up good ground. Right. The JLP, on the other hand, I don't know if this is something to be particularly worried about. I think they would be foolish not to look at it and not to be concerned about what the data says. But in reality, that midterm, you know, and midterm, you tend to find that, you know, unless you're really doing a great job, which I don't think anybody believes they are, that you expect this kind of, you know, rubbing off of the shine, so to speak, in cricket terms. So I think they should be concerned about it. But as you rightly say, elections have become very, very transactional of late.
Yes.
Not only in Jamaica, you know. And because they have, obviously, the wherewithal, the financial depth to be able to create a different environment, so to speak, it's something that they would look at. But whether they would be overly worried about it, then I don't think so. Unless when we do another study in 3 months' time, thereabout, we find that there's a further erosion of the JLP support, then that's when they really need to sit up and say, hold on a minute, what's going on? Let's address this. But I think for the moment, they would want to be concerned about where they are, but not overly worried about where they are.
Yes. Well, what are there other results that you'll be publishing anytime soon in relation to these matters? And you are free, if you wish, to give us some of those as a pre-release.
No, right. The data, I think they've expired. They've completed the releases that they had. The last one was the party standings, which was carried on Sunday. So we don't have any more to release, but we have more depths of data, which I can't share with you on this.
All right. All right, Don. I thank you anyway.
Yeah,
man. You've said a lot, and we appreciate it. Take care. Have a good day.
Respect.
And you too all.
All right. Appreciate it. That's Don Anderson, the Chief Executive Officer of Market Research Services Limited. And he recently conducted a poll on behalf of the People's National Party, and we discussed what those findings are.